Hi buddies, hope you're doing fine. In this series, we are going to talk about the important questions from the modern age. If you are ready, let's get started. 302 onwards. In which novel Conrad deals with a detective story, The Shadow Line, a confession? Which novel of Conrad remains incomplete? The Rescue, a romance of the shallows. In which novel Conrad collaborated with Ford Madox Hufer? The Inheritors, an extravagant story. Conrad's short story collection, Tales of Hearsay, was published posthumously. Who was a member of Edwardian novelist George Bernard Shaw, whose father was a professional cricketer, Rudyard Kipling, in which novel Wells presents a picture of the contemporary society, the elements of reconstruction. Wells' The Work, Wealth and Happiness of Mankind is a novel whose disciples were Shaw, D. H. Lawrence, Somerset, Mohammed Wells, John Millington Synge. Which novel deals with Butler's childhood and his relation with his father, the authoress of Odyssey? Butler's Erewhon and Erewhon Revisited was the sequel of the authoress of the Odyssey. Which novel shows Butler's classical interest? The Japanese origin of Odyssey. In which book Butler translated Iliad and Odyssey? The authoress of the Odyssey. Rudyard Kipling got Nobel Prize in the year 1907. Which book of Rudyard Kipling is the collection of the articles From Sea to Sea? 1900. Kipling worked as a reporter of Civil and Military Gazette and pioneer between 1882 to 1887. The romantic conception of a soldier finds expression in Arms and the Man, which play represents a person, his wife, and a poet involved in the eternal triangle. Candida, which play is set in what period? Heartbreak House. Which play of Synge is a comedy based on an old folk tale? The Shadows of the Glen. Which play deals with the themes of love and death? Dear Day of the Sorrows. In which play Synge composed powerful tragedy in one act, Riders to the Sea. John Galsworthy's The Fawcett Saga is a sequence of novels. Oscar Wilde composed comedies of manners in the tradition of Sheridan. Who wrote The Secret Life? Harley Granville Barker. Which book of W.B. Yeats contains the poems of realism, responsibilities? Which play of Yeats highlights injustice to the Irishman, the Countess Kathleen? This play concerned with the heroism of Coachellane is On Bailey Strand. Which book of Yeats was dedicated to his wife by spirits? A Vision. Who was awarded by the Military Cross for his war poems? Wilfred Owen. Who was the editor of the magazine entitled Woman? Enoch Arnold Bennett. Which novel of Lawrence contains the story of unhappy human relationship? The White Peacock. Lawrence, Women in Love was the sequel of The Plum Serpent. The character Stephen Dedalus was modeled on James Joyce. In which novel Joyce uses stream of consciousness technique? Ulysses. Who introduced stream of consciousness technique? Virginia Woolf. Which work of Virginia Woolf remains incomplete? Orlando, a biography. Which novel of Edward Morgan Foster deals with the misunderstanding between individual and races? Howard's End. In which novel of Edward Morgan Foster deals with the conflict between two different cultures? Where angels fear to tread. Which novel of Aldous Leonard Huxley is a lightened satire on contemporary society? Chrome Yellow. Which novel derives its title from Shakespeare? Brave New World. Which was the best novel of Maugham? Cakes and Ale. Of Human Bondage is an autobiographical novel. Which novel of Priestley deals with the story of the adventures of touring? The Good Companions. Who worked as a director of Faber and Faber publication? T.S. Eliot. Which poem was based on the legend of Fisher King? The Wasteland. Which book of T.S. Eliot contains non-dramatic poetry? Four quartets. Which play contains the moving speeches of chorus of the women of Canterbury? Murder in the Cathedral. Which poem of W.H. Auden was composed in collaboration with Isherwood? The Dog Beneath the Skin. Which book did Lewis edit with his contemporary, Oxford Poetry? Which play is in Auden Isherwood tradition? Out of the Picture. Which book shows Lewis' love for nature from feathers to iron? Which book of Sitwell sensitively analyzes the poetry of Pope? Alexander Pope. Which poems of Yeats opens with the words between extremities man runs his course? Vacillation. Who is the protagonist in Samuel Butler's The Way of All Flesh? Ernest. Dracula, a masterpiece of horror fiction, was written by Bram Stoker. Oral Stevenson's Kidnapped and its sequel, Katrina, are set in 18th century Scotland. The admirer of Ibsen who wrote the essay, The Quintessence of Ibsenism, is George Bernard Shaw. Shaw's early plays which fell victim to Lord Chamberlain's censorship include The Philanderer, Mrs. Warren's Profession, who wrote the essays Modern Fiction and Mr. Bennet and Mrs. Brown, Virginia Woolf, Pilgrimage, Dorothy Richardson's sequence of novels contains 13 volumes. Prior to Prouds, who had pioneered the technique of stream of consciousness in France. Dujardin. Gerald Crich appears in D.H. Lawrence's novel The Virgin and the Gypsy, who was appointed the Poet Laureate in 1980 in succession to Robert Bridges. John Mansfield. Eliot's The Wasteland appeared first in the quarterly magazine The Criterion, which two novelists collaborated on the novels The Inheritance of 1901 and Romance of 1903, Joseph Conrad and Maddox Ford. Eliot's worst comedies include The Cocktail Party, The Confidential Clerk, The Elder Statesman, who wrote the anthology of poems Folkade in 1922, Edith Sitwell. Edith Sitwell volumes of poetry include Street Songs, Green Songs, The Song of the Cold. The adolescent Stephen is the protagonist in Joyce, a portrait of the artist as a young man. Sweeney Agonistus, published in 1932, was an experiment in modern playwriting by T.S. Eliot. The military officer who wrote an epic of suffering and comradeship in parentheses is David Jones, who wrote the vast and idiosyncratic novel A Glastonbury Romance. Compton Burnett. Novels such as Decline and Fall, A Handful of Dust, Wild Bodies, and Black Mischief were written by Evelyn Waugh. Which novel of Evelyn Waugh is set in the tottering African kingdom of Azania? Black Mischief. Charles Ryder is the narrator and protagonist in Evelyn Waugh's Brideshead. Aldous Huxley's most celebrated book is a utopian or rather dystopian fantasy, Brave New World. In Brave New World, the calendar is dated AF, which stands for After Ford. Huxley described his experiences of India in the travel book Justin Pilot. Day-Lewis became the Poet Laureate in the year 1968. Named the founder of Poetry Review, a periodical, Harold Monroe. Who are the nightingales of the poem Sweeney Among the Nightingale by Eliot? Prostitutes. The Journey of the Maggie is a poem written by T.S. Eliot. Another piece written by O. Henry is titled The Gift of the Maggie. What is the length of T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland? 5 parts, about 400 lines. Between October and November 1922, The Wasteland was serialized in The Criterion. How would you classify the love song of Alfred Y. Prufrock as a dramatic monologue? Hippopotamus, a poem by T.S. Eliot, is a satire on the church. Who is the author of I, Claudius? Robert Graves. Never Never Land is depicted in The Pigeon by John Galsworthy. Human nature does not change. This theme runs in J.M. Barrie's Dear Brutus, who says God will come and we will be saved. If we drop him, his will punish us. Vladimir. In the play, Chas Lonsko shows emptiness of existence by representing empty chairs. Who are the exponents of the theatre of total cruelty? Jean Genet, Peter Weiss, George Triana. In which of Wool's novels M.S. Lardrobe appears between the acts? Which continental author influenced English drama considerably? Ibsen. How old was Robert Bridges when he published The Testament of Beauty? 85. W.B. Yeats belonged to Ireland. Which poem of John Masefield contains a sinner's confession? The Everlasting Mercy. Name the unfinished autobiography of William McNeice. The Strings of Falls. After Queen Victoria's death, Edward II acceded to the throne of England in the year 1901. Who is an Indian by birth and who called upon Englishmen to make up white man's burden and reap his own reward? Rudyard Kipling. Who wrote The Testament of Beauty in 1929? Robert Bridges. What's the title of the poem of Robert Bridges written in 1904 for the opening of Saunderville College, Oxford? Demeter. Yeats' poems The Black Tower and Under Ben Bubben show the influence of Indian thought, especially of the Bhagavad Gita. T.S. Eliot's first volume of poems, which appeared in 1917, is Prufrock and Other Observations. Who won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1948? T.S. Eliot. T.S. Eliot's Ash Wednesday has 6 parts. A great essayist and journalist is known as Alpha of the Plough, A.G. Gardiner. That's all about this video. If you need more like this, do comment. Thank you so much for watching this video till end. If you're having any suggestion, let me know in the comment section. We'll see you next video. Tada, bye bye.